Welcome back to Never Did It. I'm Jake Ziegler, and I'm here with Brad Garoon. On Never Did It, we look back at the last 100 years of movie history in an effort to fill in some of our own movie blind spots. Today we're covering the year 1956, and we are filling in a couple of major blind spots for both of us. We're going to hit John Ford's The Searchers and Akira Kurosawa's Ikiru. Brad, let's start with Ikiru. That was the one you gave me. Tell me why you gave it to me.
So I only gave it to you for this year so we could do it. Period. We already had other stuff for 1952, the year this movie actually came out.
Mm-hmm.
But it came out in the States only very briefly in 1956 under the name Doomed, which I learned today. And the poster for it was just the stripper. And then it came out again in earnest, or like for real, in 1960 and was very well received because it is, in my opinion, one of the greatest movies ever made. You could, and I would argue, it's Akira Kurosawa's either best movie or most grounded movie. It is definitely his movie about the most relatable kinds of people. It stars Takashi Shimura as Kanji Watanabe, a guy who is about to die. When I watched this movie the first time and they give him his terminal diagnosis, I thought for a good half hour, there's no way they're going to call him and tell him it was a mistake. I didn't know what the movie was about, and I was like, that's just not what this movie's about. Turns out that is what this movie's about.
Very much. Well, and what's interesting about the diagnosis, too, is that they don't actually give him the diagnosis. Is that they say it in a way that, like, they don't tell him he has stomach cancer. They say it in a way, what do they tell him? It's like, they say it's like indigestion or something like that. They don't actually tell him he has cancer. But right. It's like, it's said in a code where, like, he understands that's what it is.
Right, which the remake does quite differently.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. That part reminded me of the movie The Farewell. Have you seen I'm sure you've seen The Farewell.
Oh, yes. Love The Farewell.
So, you know, that whole, I mean, I know it takes place in an entirely different country. China is not Japan. But the whole gimmick there is that they don't tell this woman that she has lung cancer. The premise is that in doing so, she lives much longer because she's not resigned to her fate. We're talking about Ikiru. Takashi Shimura was in more Akira Kurosawa films than even Toshiro Mifune. He's also the star of the first two Godzilla movies. He's like this iconic totemic figure of 1950s and 60s and 40s Japanese film that doesn't get the love I think he deserves because he's less showy than Mifune. Mm-hmm. But this movie does get the love it deserves, thankfully. Anyway, he finds out he's going to die, and he decides that with the end of his life, he wants to do something impactful because he's just been a rotten bureaucrat, just a bored, boring bureaucrat his whole life who raised a bored, boring son and a crappy daughter-in-law. And now he wants to do something with it, so he decides to build a playground. I've seen this movie like 3 times now, and I just think it's so sweet. I love old Turtleface doing his thing. I wanted you to see it. I feel like your Kurosawa filmography, your Kurosawa list has quite a few holes in it.
It does.
And I want to do what I can to fill it. Now, I'm also I'm still waiting for Redbeard to show up at a repertory theater because that's how I want to see that.
Mm-hmm.
But I've seen like most like Redbeard, Sanjuro. Those are the 2 big ones that I haven't seen. Yeah, the rest, I just think he's great. This one's great. Oh, Dreams, I haven't seen. One of his later ones. So yeah, I wanted you to see it. What did you think of Ikiru, which means living in Japanese?
Yeah, this movie really blew me away. I had seen Living, actually, and we'll talk about that a little bit more.
You saw Living first?
Oh, yeah. I had seen Living. Well, because Living was an Oscar contender, when it came out. Bill Nighy was nominated for an Oscar. So, of course, I had to see Living when it came out. And I just hadn't seen Ikiru for whatever reason. So, like, I had seen Living a couple of years ago when it came out. And I mentioned this in my Letterboxd review of Living, is that sometimes with movies, even though, I wear hearing aids, I am hard of hearing, Meniere's disease, hard of hearing, I wear the hearing aids. I can't remember, I think I had them then. But even with the hearing aids, sometimes it can be hard for me to hear because I have tinnitus so bad in my right ear. Sometimes even with the hearing aids, it's hard for me to hear certain movies where they have accents, and especially when it's like a quiet movie, like Living is a quiet movie where everyone has a strong accent. So certain things about, movies, like it just, there's going to be things I miss probably in some movies. And I think Living was one of those movies where like I really liked it and Bill Nighy is very good at it, but I didn't remember, it's been a couple of years already since I've seen it. So, a lot of Ikiru surprised me. So I wasn't waiting, in Ikiru, I wasn't like waiting for every single thing to happen. Plus I watched Living again. So they're very, very similar, but they're not like a shot-for-shot remake or anything. There's a lot of differences in them. So there was still a lot of surprises for me in Ikiru and a lot of things that I didn't know about it and I didn't know were going to happen. Yes, 100% agree. Probably one of the best films I've ever seen. I haven't done like a top 100 list or anything recently, but just the way this movie progresses, there's no action in the movie. It's not at all an action movie, but it flows so seamlessly just from one part to the next, where yes, he gets his diagnosis, and just from where it follows him from what he does with it's almost episodic in a way, where first he meets the fun guy, the guy who takes him out on the town and shows him a good time. He has like that whole sequence, and that's just great, where it shows him kind of learning how to have a good time. And then he has the relationship with the younger woman, which I also found very interesting, because there's no romantic tension, I think, at all. No sexual tension at all. I think this character might even be, he might even be like an asexual character before that was really even a thing, because it talks about, how when he lost his wife, he completely became a mummy. And that's the woman's character's name for him. She worked with him, and she had given him that nickname, like Mr. Mummy. So he, completely seals himself off from any women like that, is not interested in this young, attractive woman at all. It's just not part of, anything that he's interested in. He just wants the companionship, sees her as someone who has like a zest for life. And I find that to be a very interesting angle to take as well. So there's that. And then there's, again, spoiling the crap out of this movie, but, then after he dies, there's this whole second sequence, which you mentioned turns into 12 Angry Men, which I was like, what is happening here? Like, was not prepared for that at all. Living sort of does it, but in a much different way, in a much truncated way. Everything about Living is like much more truncated. It's very similar. They do a lot of the same things and a lot of the same scenes, but it's a lot shorter. Whereas Ikiru kind of draws things out and really lets it breathe, really lets you sit with what he's doing and what he's experiencing, and it gets into you a lot more, I think, that way. And also, Living, I think, is very good, and I think a good remake, but it's just, Ikiru is just like just a perfect movie in, I think, every way.
Spot on, 100%. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna drill in on some of the things you said. Let's start with Living is a shorter version of Ikiru. Living is quite literally 40 minutes shorter than Ikiru. Mm-hmm. Where I think that works really well, Ikiru is very much a Japanese movie, and Living is very, very British. Ikiru spends a lot of time on minute details, on long shots, long moments, long pauses, and Living is much more about mannerly, whereas Ikiru is about process. Living is about like expectation. Mm-hmm. I love that you brought up the funeral scene or the memorial after he dies. First off, he dies it feels like he dies very early in Ikiru.
Yeah, I was like, there's 35 minutes of movie left. I was like, what the hell? Yeah.
When I saw Living in the theater, I was wondering, are they? And I love Living. Oh, I'm with you. I actually love it. Ikiru 5 stars for me. Living 4.5.
Yeah.
I was glad they didn't do the whole rigmarole, because in Ikiru he builds this playground with the end of his life. That's what he devotes himself to, cutting through a bunch of red tape through his knowledge of red tape and getting this playground built. But he does it so quietly that at his memorial, all these snakes in the grass are able to be like, well, maybe this guy is responsible, this living guy and this living guy. They can take the credit. And you wonder, is this guy posthumously going to get the credit that he deserves? Not that that's even what he was after.
Not at all.
In Living, it's much shorter and it's much more emotional, and it's about who knew what about his diagnosis before he died, and what does that mean to his son, and will his son realize that he treated his father poorly in his last days? Whereas that's not so important in Ikiru, because we have kind of written off that guy anyway.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really sweet. The next thing I want to drill down on real quick, the Tom Burke character. Mm-hmm. So that was my introduction to him. You mentioned this fun guy who teaches him how to have fun. And yes, that happens. But it also shows him that like this is not going to be what fulfills him at the end of his life. He's not going to go out whoring. He's not going to go out gambling and drinking. In fact, in both versions, he sings like a very sad song.
Oh my God, the song. Yeah. And they're different songs too. I love that too. Yeah, that they're different, like regional songs. The one he's singing is a very Japanese song, and then Bill Nye in his version sings a really Scottish song, which I thought killed me.
Yeah, but imagine if Bill Nye sang a Japanese song in the middle of Living. That'd be so weird.
He's a worldly guy.
Not really. That's the whole point. Yeah, and then that song. Anyway, I'll get back to Tom York or York, whatever. Tom York.
We're way up in here. Yeah.
I'll get back to Furiosa's boyfriend in a minute. Mm-hmm. I like that the song comes back at the end of the movie. The iconic shot of Ikiru is Watanabe sitting on a swing in the playground that he had built by himself and singing that song again, and knowing this is his last day, or maybe one of his two. He's on his way out, but he has satisfaction, and they spell that out in Living. where the protege, sort of Bill Nighy goes back to the park after being frustrated that everyone who's made this resolution to cast off the red tape and do things by their heart have all gone back to being the same bureaucrats they always were. He goes and he meets a cop who regrets not forcing Bill Nighy to get out of the cold and telling him, no, I think that was the happiest he's ever been, or the happiest he's been in a long time.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful way to end the movie. But just going back to Tom Burke real quick. This was the first time I'd ever seen him, and I thought he was perfect in this role as like his avatar for debauchery. This author, right? He's a writer.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
In both cases, really good. But I don't know the actor in Ikiru who played this guy.
Yeah, neither.
But Tom Burke was great, and then when he popped up in Furiosa, I was like, living.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I mean, yeah, that's definitely not the thing that's going to make him happy. But that's also like the first episode. Like the first thing that he's trying in this like episodic type of film. Like that's the first thing he does. So yeah, of course that's not going to make him happy. Otherwise, it would be a less than 90-minute movie.
Totally.
I think it's an important piece of him kind of figuring out like I have never done this. What is this experience going to be like? Going out and doing this, and it turns out to be very sad.
And then in both Living and in Ikiru, Shinichi Himura and Amy Lou Wood, who play in the second episode, so to speak, play like the young lady who befriends him. They're both incredible. And like you said, it just does so much for his character to have this person who he can be inspired by, who he can decide he's going to do that third episode because of her. In Ikiru, it's her love of making toys. And then what's his bunnies? It's going to be helping the people who had been complaining that there was no way to get past one station telling her to go to another station and the other department telling her to go to another department. Basically what I had to deal with when I spent too much money on a rental car, or when they overcharged me on a rental car. Go to this person. Eventually I got my $100. There was a Bill Nighy type, a Watanabe type helping me out, I think.
Because
anyway, it's wonderful. What's the next Kurosawa movie you want to watch?
Boy, I don't even know if I want to admit like some of these that I've never seen. Like, dude, I've never seen Ran. I've never seen Rashomon. Gosh, I mean, I haven't seen Seven Samurai since I was in college, probably. I mean, it's embarrassing.
Seven Samurai is also, Shimura is like the lead samurai, not Mifune, who's like the rogue samurai.
Mm-hmm.
Or I would recommend watching the original Godzilla because it's actually pretty good. And then he plays a different scientist in Godzilla Raids Again, which is funny because those movies are not connected to each other.
Not connected, but yeah, I mean, this movie just really, and I knew it would be good. I mean, I didn't have any like doubts, like well, I wonder if I'm gonna like this acclaimed movie from Kurosawa, but still, it's a testament to the movie where I was like, we're still really got to me more than even like I was expecting it to, and like really, by the end, I was just completely blown away by it. Like that last like 30-35 minutes, I'm not even sure what to compare it to. I mean, yeah, certainly a little comparison to 12 Angry Men in a way, but I can't really think of another movie where a character dies, the main character of the movie dies like that. I mean, he's still there like in flashbacks as they talk about him and stuff, but he's died, and then they just kind of like almost like litigate like the last part of his life like that. I'm not sure if I can really compare that to anything else, or there's nothing that comes to mind that's similar to that, just the way they did it. And it was still just so, a movie that's whatever 60-70 years old still just kind of like surprised me and took me completely off guard like that. I did not know that was coming.
This is a weak comparison, but I think the Archers did a good job doing something similar and I think this came out first, but in The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, where it's not that the character dies, but you get these hard cuts to like, okay, now we're going to do something totally different with the story.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, shifting gears to a movie that actually came out in 1956. Let's talk about John Ford's The Searchers. Tell me why you recommended this movie for me.
Well, this is another very, very famous movie by a very, very famous auteur, John Ford, one of the most decorated American filmmakers ever. He has done so many Western films, and he's won so many Oscars. I mean, he's the most awarded director in Oscar history. He's won 4 of them as a director. His films are highly successful. He made The Grapes of Wrath. He did How Green Was My Valley. Tons of movies. Worked with John Wayne for so long. And John Wayne, garbage human being that he is, just a gigantic movie star and a huge figure in American cinema throughout the 40s, 50s, and 60s. We talked about him, of course, on our True Grit podcast. And The Searchers is one of his most talked about performances. And it's one of John Ford's most talked about movies. And it's arguably their most famous and most highly regarded collaboration. And selfishly, it had been a long time since I'd seen this one too. I didn't have a rating for it on Letterboxd, so it seemed like a good time to revisit it. And I was very curious to see what you would think about it, because there's, I think, a lot to be said about this movie still, even today.
I am really glad you recommended it. It was very fortuitous that right around the time you recommended it, the Film Forum in New York City decided to do a John Ford series, and The Searchers played this past weekend, and I got to see it yesterday on the big screen.
So jealous of that, yeah.
It was awesome. And you know what? I think I would have liked it almost as much had I seen it at home. I'm glad. I like when I can see these movies at the Film Forum, because phone away, I can put my phone away at home, but the theater going experience is just so much better. The day before I saw Beetlejuice, which is such a nothing movie. By comparison, it was better. Yeah. So, okay, let me just say, I like it a lot. Let's talk about what it's about. It takes place during the Texas Indian War. The Comanches trick a group of Texas Rangers into chasing them out into the wilderness because they take a bunch of cattle from the Jorgensen family. And while the Rangers are out, the Comanches come and burn John Wayne's brother's house down and kills a lot of his family and kidnaps his two nieces, John Wayne's two nieces. The only survivors that we see are John Wayne and this boy who the family had taken in as a child because his parents had been killed by the Comanche. And that's the second lead of the film. Mm-hmm. His name is Marty. Yeah, Marty. And he's played by Jeffrey Hunter, who passed away not too long after this came out. Yeah, this is a crazy story. I forget the name of the movie, but there was an explosion stunt, and it was supposed to explode outside a car, and the explosion went into the car and gave him a concussion. And then several months later, he had complications from that concussion. He fell, had a hemorrhage, cracked his skull, and died.
Jeez, I never knew that story.
Yeah, it was supposed to be a different actor. I forget his name, but Walt Disney wouldn't let him do it. He was under contract to Disney. Never even told him about the offer. Yeah, typical. So Hunter got to do it. Anyway, so most of the movie is Hunter and Wayne spending years searching for these girls. We find out relatively early on that one of them has been killed. So searching for the other one, who in the end of the movie is played by Natalie Wood, which is a whole other thing we can get into. The young version of her is played by her sister, which is very cool. And at the same time, there's like a B plot going on back at the home, on the home front, where Hunter's character had this fiance or this girl that he was always attached to, and she's frustrated that he keeps going off on this they think,
because he won't make her his fiance. That's what
exactly.
That's the tension between them. Yeah, is that because he's not home enough, because he's out searching for Debbie.
He's not focused on Lori. There's a lot of very funny stuff that happens in this B plot. There's a lot of great, really funny side characters. Mose
is great.
Even the man that Lori gets engaged to down the road, and his silly accent. It's so fun. There was way more comedy than I was expecting.
More than I remembered. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
It's funny. So your hero, Roger Ebert, he said in his review of the movie, or one of his, I'm sure, many reviews of the movie, that the home front stuff should be skipped. And you could totally ignore it and just focus on the more compelling search. But I could not disagree with that more.
I don't think he said that. I think he said some people do that.
Well, then I hope I misread it, because
I think he did. I'm going to have to go back and read it because I read his review again too. But I think he said that some people choose to do that in their defense of the movie, because some people say that brings the movie down, and some people would just ignore that. But I don't think he's suggesting that we should do that.
The second strand is without interest, and those who value the searchers filter it out, is the exact quote. Do you have a response?
Nah.
Okay. So no, I think it's vital just to the mood, because how dour would the movie be if it was just this wild goose chase that Hunter and Wayne are on the whole time?
Well, there has to be other things going on in their lives other than this. I mean, because this takes place over 5-6 years. I mean, their lives, the rest of their lives didn't stop. I mean, there has to be these other things going on. I agree completely. Yeah.
So like you said, Wayne is excellent in this. What I love most is right off the bat, and okay, I'm going to admit, where you are with Kurosawa, I am with Ford. I've seen one other John Ford movie. That movie is Mr. Roberts. That movie is not great. Henry Fonda as a Navy captain, who it's basically like a serious version of McHale's Navy. It's not amazing. I only watched it because there's a sequel to it starring Walter Matthau, but Jack Lemmon is in Mr. Roberts with Henry Fonda, so that's kind of cool. I mean, it's a stacked cast. It's also got William Powell, who plays the role that Walter Matthau would go on to play, and James Cagney is the antagonist. So stacked cast, not a great movie. And that was the only other John Ford movie I'd seen. So I cannot say that I'm up on Ford. quite the opposite. In fact, when I have read about Ford that he's considered like the first American auteur filmmaker, I was like, based on what? There's no style in Mr. Roberts. Plenty of style in The Searchers. There's a very cool motif where at the beginning of the movie, you're in the house and the camera takes you out into the wilderness. And then the same thing happens at the end and a couple of times throughout the movie. But that's such a cool, like, way to intro and outro Wayne's character, because he's coming into their lives from the wilderness and then he's going back out into the wilderness from, it's actually a different family's lives, but still. So my thought about John Ford, and in my experience with Mr. Roberts, is that everything that's on the screen, that's the text and there is no subtext. And then I watched The Searchers, and in the first 10 minutes, I'm like, oh, there's something else going on here.
Yep.
What is the deal with John Wayne and his brother's wife? What is happening? There is not a single word said about this relationship, but every look they give each other, every way they touch each other implies that there was something else going on. And to me, that informs all of Wayne's drive to both find and then perhaps kill his niece, or is it his daughter?
But would he really want to kill his own daughter?
So here's why I think yes. This movie is very concerned with miscegenation and race. How angry would a man at that time be that his daughter was the wife of a Comanche chief? She's tainted. And he keeps talking about how life with the buck is not a life. She's been with them. She's one of them. Why would he care if it was a distant relative, but she's a stain on him if it's his daughter?
Okay. Two things about that. Actually, one short thing and one longer thing. Two things about that. I wouldn't say a niece is a distant relative. That's a pretty close relative.
Well, he hasn't seen this family for like a decade.
Still, it's still his brother's daughter. I mean, and he hasn't seen him because he's been off at war. Like he's been in,
right.
like he's
no.
Been in the
I'm just saying he doesn't have a close relationship with these people. He thought the older daughter was the younger daughter, and she just like was frozen in time for 10 years.
Sure. But it's it's not like it's his like third cousin's.
I hear what you're saying. I'm just saying they're not close.
Right, at the beginning, yeah, like they're not close or anything, certainly, when he comes back in, sure. The second thing, though, is that we haven't really mentioned, we've kind of just hinted, but like, John Wayne is super, super racist in this movie, much like he was in real life. His character is alarmingly racist right from the bat, and what I appreciate about this movie, too, is that even his family and some of the other characters are like, oh my god, he's really racist. Like, even for a movie that came out in the 50s about characters of the 1860s, they're like, oh, he's a little racist. Like, oh my gosh, like he goes so far as to, there's a scene where they uncover the body. There's a dead Comanche body that they uncover out of the woods. And he goes so far as to, shoot his eyeballs out, because then he knows their ways, and he knows that if he doesn't have his eyes, like he can't like advance like into their afterlife or something like that. Like he hates them that much. Like that's how racist he is. And like that's so like I could buy. I'm not saying you're wrong about it being his daughter, but I'm saying like maybe he just hates them that much that it doesn't matter if it's his niece or his daughter. He would want to do that to anyone. Like even if it was his neighbor, he would want to kill that person just because he hates them that much and he's that disgusted by them.
I agree with everything you said. This movie is concerned with race. It is not just like an afterthought that Wayne is racist. And he's not the only racist person. When Laurie gets upset that Marty is going to go back to fight for Debbie that last time, she says, your own mother would want Debbie to die if she knew that she was one of these people. And Laurie is a person that we're supposed to feel compassion towards. This movie is deliberately concerned with race, which is wild for the time. Like, spoiler alert, when they massacre the Comanche at the end of this movie,
massacre a bunch of Native Americans. Yeah, spoiler alert.
It's not shown in like a heroic, brave thing. It is a very thrilling scene. But I remember thinking like, whoo, this is rough. And I'm like pretty uncomfortable with how indiscriminate this killing is. You're meant to feel that way. Even the villain of the movie is allowed to give an explanation of his actions. I had 2 sons. Every time you kill one of my sons, that's when I go out and I collect scalps. Clearly, now, we're not saying eye for an eye is right, but clearly what happened when he burned the house is that one of his sons had been murdered by these Texas expansionists. This movie is concerned with race. But I think it did feel during the expedition that Wayne deciding to kill Debbie when even though she runs after them to tell them to leave, when they first finally discover her, and she's in her Natalie Wood form, that he has decided rather suddenly to kill her. And I think it's in that moment where he, to me, the way I interpreted the movie is he is accepting my daughter is tainted, so she's dead. I think he would have tried to save her otherwise. And I think that because when they get to the Yankee station, where the Yankee army has come in and they've put down a big group of Comanche, not the ones that we're looking for, but a big group of the Comanche. And they have 4 women that they've rescued, 4 white women that they've rescued. He goes and looks for her calmly, trying to identify one of them as Debbie.
Yeah.
He's not in there with, he doesn't say to them, you should hang these girls. He says to them, they are now Comanche. Like they're not the women that they were when they were kidnapped. But he's not angry at them. He's not violent with them. I really feel like it was super personal for him. I guess more than anything, I don't believe that there would have been these weird moments between Wayne's character and his sister-in-law had it not been for something.
Certainly. Yeah.
So that's cool because that's all subtext.
Yeah. Oh yeah, certainly it's not implicitly stated at all. Yeah. And I'll put it out there. I do agree with you. I just wanted to push back a little bit for the discussion's sake, but I mean, I would agree with that certainly. Yeah.
Wonderful. You know what else is cool? This movie's crazy influential. It's impossible to watch the first 20 minutes of this movie and not think, oh, George Lucas stole everything from Searchers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think he'd be the first to admit it, too. Like, I mean, absolutely.
It's A New Hope. I mean, like, the beginning of the movie is A New Hope. Wayne is Anakin, like, sand makes me mad. I'm going to kill everybody who did the sand. It's pretty wild. It's also kind of funny that it seems like they got quite a few either Hispanic or Native actors to play the Native Americans, except for Chief Scar, who's just played by a German guy.
Oh, come on.
I mean, you can tell just by looking at him, like, that's a white dude.
Yeah, I know. But hey, for 1956, I mean, the fact that there's any of them in, I mean, we'll take it.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah, I thought it was wonderful. I gave it 4.5 stars. I mean, there's a little wonkiness here and there. Some of the sets look like sets and not like, even though a lot of it's filmed on location, I thought the Futterman betrayal and subsequent like shot in the back thing was just to add that was a brief thing just to add a little bit of tension to the end. But I think the biggest sin that this movie makes, and it's the biggest sin I've seen in a movie in like quite some time, is that, what's his name?
Marty?
No, I mean, he's not great, right? He's certainly like not great, but Ward Bond is not in enough of the movie.
Yeah.
So Ward Bond plays the head of the Texas Rangers / the town reverend.
Yeah.
And what an amazing presence he has. And what an amazing hat he wears. I mean, I just wanted like way more of him.
Yeah.
And his whole thing with the Yankee soldier at the end of the movie, you keep that sword away from me. You keep that knife away from me. Hard cut to stabbed in the ass.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Well, and this movie too, you mentioned the shot of him leaving the house. There, that's that really famous shot of John Wayne, standing alone in that doorway, and that just really sums up his character and sums up his journey in that one movie. Like, he's still at the end of the movie, he is alone, and he hasn't changed, even though he ends up not killing Debbie when he rescues her at the end. He just he holds her arm and says, "Let's go home, Debbie." And that's the other thing too that I think lends credence to the thing where it says like, "Let's go home, Debbie," like home. Like, you don't say that to your niece. Like, I mean, that's kind of weird.
I did think it was a little strange that Debbie had such a sudden change of heart and decided she wanted to go back with them. Yeah,
maybe, but I don't really have a good answer for
there isn't one. The movie doesn't have to be perfect. It's very. I also like that Marty got to be the one who killed Scar. Although we saw, much to your point, we know that John Wayne then comes in, Uncle Ethan. Who we hear his name a bajillion times during the movie, Uncle Ethan, comes in and desecrates the body again after.
Yeah, gosh, and there's even that scene where he kills a bunch of buffalo just so that they can't have them, just so that the Comanche won't be able to have them themselves. Like, he's just a super dick in this movie. I mean, it's just, and I think it's interesting that we recently did 5 Easy Pieces with the Jack Nicholson character, and I actually thought of these two characters together where, this came out obviously about 15 years before the 5 Easy Pieces, but it was like, I thought it was kind of a similar, like, almost like a nihilistic, just angry, borderline, just not even borderline, he was just a cruel, just angry person. And I think that was for 1956. I don't know, maybe I'm not as up on 50s movies as I should be, but I feel like this maybe was a bit of an anomaly for movies coming out then. Like, the John Wayne character felt like he was came out of a 70s movie, like felt like he came out of like a Hal Ashby or, a Bob Raffleson movie, something like that, where he was, complicated, not heroic whatsoever. I mean, there's not a lot, even though he risks a lot to go save his niece/daughter, there's really not a lot that's heroic about him, and there's not a lot that's redeeming about him, and I don't think the movie asks you to feel that way about him at all. I think that's really a point in the movie's favor too, that's like, here's this character that we're going to follow, and it's an interesting story, even though he's not a heroic, saintly type of figure that John Wayne played in a lot of his movies.
I think it's different for Wayne. I don't know. I feel like around the time this was happening, I'm looking at my list of my top movies of 56, and half of them have bad men in the lead role. Like, not always irredeemable. In fact, one of them, the point is that he's redeemed, but but bad men who do bad things throughout the movie. Wayne does say in his defense, or Ethan does say in his defense, when Marty runs up and says, "Why are you shooting the buffalo?" He says, "To fill our hungry bellies." And
then he shoots a bunch more of them.
Then he shoots a bunch and says, "The Cherokee won't be eating these this winter." Yeah, or not the Cherokee, the Comanche. Did your wife watch this with you?
She did not. And at first I didn't want to watch it with her because I wasn't sure. Like, obviously I remembered it being super racist. Like, that was, even though I hadn't seen it in a while, that's obviously, I think, a major, plot point or character point in the movie. So I remembered that, and I was like, oh, maybe I should watch this without her, because I didn't want to have it be such a very uncomfortable experience for her. But now, having watched it, I would be very curious to see how she would react to it, because it is not presented in a way that, like, a lot of those older movies are, where it's just like, everybody's racist and that's just the joke, when a lot of those movies are. So I'd be very curious to see how it would play to her.
Yeah, I'd like to know what she thinks of it too, because it does on the outset feel pretty damn racist, and then by the end you're like, oh, that's the point. Yeah. Talk to me about Oscars for The Searchers. I assume nothing for Ikiru.
Nothing for The Searchers either. Which I find so amazing, because, again, like I talked about, John Ford movies were huge Oscar hits for years and years before this, but for whatever reason, this movie didn't resonate. Maybe it was because John Wayne wasn't, the heroic figure that he was before. It wasn't like, The Grapes of Wrath had been a bigger hit for John Ford at the Oscars. How Green Was My Valley was another one that was a big hit for him. That's the movie that beat Citizen Kane for Best Picture that year. So maybe it was because the movie was uncomfortable in a lot of ways. Maybe that's why it didn't get the love. But yeah, no Oscar nominations whatsoever for The Searchers. But like we said before, the Oscars are just such a snapshot in time sort of thing, because obviously this movie has stood up more than a lot of the movies that probably did get nominated for Oscars that year.
Both of these movies, in their defense, have been listed rather highly in the Sight and Sound list. And I think both are on the National Film Registry. Or I guess Ikiru wouldn't be. But
Ikiru is, Ikiru Berlin International Film Festival is nominated there, and then, BAFTA Award. Didn't win a BAFTA Award until 1960, so it must not have come out in the UK until 1960.
And then there's, obviously it won these Japanese awards too, so.
Right.
All right, cool. Let's do our top fives of 1956. So Ikiru won't be appearing on mine because I do it by the year that it was theatrically released wide in its home country. But I do have one honorable mention. It is the movie where the man is redeemed, Bigger Than Life, which is a James Mason movie about a guy who basically does steroids and goes crazy and tries to kill his son, and then Walter Matthau and company save him.
Sounds delightful.
It's fine. It's pretty solid. It is very widely regarded. It's one of those, like we mentioned last week, 3.5 stars is what you give a movie on Letterboxd when you're supposed to like it, but you don't. I gave this one 3 stars. It's all right. Anyway, my number 5 is Rodan, the monster movie. Toho Ishiro Honda directed movie about 2 fire-breathing dragons, basically. I like this one a lot. It's a lot of fun. My number 4 is The Man Who Knew Too Much. We talked about that in our review of the original. This is Alfred Hitchcock's remake of his own movie, better than the original. This one stars James Stewart and Doris May. Really good stuff. Couple's son gets kidnapped while they're on vacation, and they have to do something about it. My number 3 is The Killing, Stanley Kubrick's breakout movie?
Yes, absolutely. Because, Paths of Glory was after this, so yeah.
Right. This is just a really fun heist film, and it's led by Sterling Hayden as I mentioned, a real piece of garbage who is a bad guy who does bad things and is not redeemed at the end of the movie.
Quentin Tarantino, I think, admittedly stole like a lot of the structure of Jackie Brown from especially the second half of The Killing.
Yeah, Elisha Cook Jr. is also in this. Always fun to see him pop up, but he's great as like just sort of like I'm a quiet guy. on the heist team. I'm a big fan of his.
Every heist team has to have one.
My number 2 is a movie that we discussed in a much earlier episode. It's The Ten Commandments. We talked about it when we talked about the silent film. This one was also remade by the man who made the first one, Cecil B. DeMille, and this is just like vastly, vastly superior than the weirdly Christian version he made in the 20s.
Wow, so weird. I think about that movie from time to time, and it just like always puzzles me.
Yeah, very strange. The epic version from 1956, excellent. I don't know what happened with that original one. There's a reason he remade it.
Yeah.
And my number 1 is The Searchers, which is just like one of the coolest Westerns I've ever seen.
When was the last time a movie that I recommended for the podcast made your number 1?
It's been a minute.
Been a minute. Yeah. Cool. Well, let's look at my top 5 then. I have a couple of honorable mentions, 2 of them that I know I've seen, but I don't have star ratings for just because they predate the Letterboxd era. That would be the aforementioned. We've talked about Seven Samurai. It came out in the States in 56. I just haven't seen it in a long time. And then a movie called Rififi, which I believe we've talked about before. That came out in the States in 56. I remember watching that in college and I really liked it. And then I have 2 movies that I do have star ratings for that are just outside of my top 5. And that's both 2 that you mentioned, Hitchcock's Man Who Knew Too Much, the remake, and the Ten Commandments remake. Both those remakes were just sit right outside my top 5. And my top 5 has a couple of movies that we've talked about in prior episodes, but they're in my top 5 of 56 because of the United States release dates. My number 5 is the Alec Guinness comedy The Lady Killers, which we covered in depth on one of our prior episodes. Just a darkly funny comedy that the Coen brothers ended up remaking to poor results, but the original is very funny, very worth seeking out.
I mentioned I was at the Film Forum to watch The Searchers. They're doing a retrospective of, I forget the name of the studio that made The Lady Killers and a bunch of other British comedies. Mm-hmm. And it was just fun to see like Alec Guinness and Peter Sellers like up on the screen in multiple roles and multiple movies together.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Nice. Number 4, another movie we covered on one of our episodes is Fellini's La Strada, about a couple of circus performers. One of them whom is very mean to the other one. Like we were talking about how mean John Wayne is in the movie. Man, the lead character in La Strada is just a real horse's ass just through the entire movie.
I would love to see the English dub of La Strada with Anthony Quinn being able to do his own lines.
I would love to see that too. I think that would be really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. It exists.
Let's see it. It's
okay.
Never did it redo. 1950, whatever, came out in Italy. But yeah, cool movie. I mean, it's Fellini, of course. My number 3 is the same as your number 3. It's Kubrick's The Killing. Yeah, just a great heist movie. Like I said, Tarantino stole from it. Probably a lot of other heist movies have stolen from it. Kind of an underappreciated Kubrick movie because he went on to make so many, big Strangelove, 2001, Clockwork Orange, Full Metal Jacket, all those other movies. But The Killing stands up like with the rest of his work. It's just really, really cool. And then my number 2 is The Searchers, which, as we covered, is amazing. And then my number 1, and these are very, very close. My number 2 and 1, number 1 is Ikiru.
Oh, first time that's probably ever happened where my pick gets your number 1 and your pick gets my number 1.
I think that's amazing. And I don't know, like I almost went the other way. Like it could go, I mean, I think The Searchers is an incredible movie for a lot of reasons, so I could go almost either way, but Ikiru really just moved me.
No, you're right. Ikiru is better than The Searchers, and it's only not on my list because it came out in 1952 in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. We'll be back next week with another 1989, I think.
Is that our next one?
I think that's our next one for if you're listening to this on Spotify, our next one might be the legendary Monsterverse / Jeff Nichols rankings. And if you're watching this on YouTube, our next one is probably a repeat. You'll notice our Thursday episodes are a little bit different than our Tuesday episodes. We're doing 2 Tuesday style episodes next week, and then coming back with No Holds Barred and Crimes and Misdemeanors.
1989. Taylor Swift will be so excited. Okay, yeah, I just gotta pull it up still.
I'm sure I'll go on a long rambling thing at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
I was editing last week and I was like, fuck, I'm talking too much.
No.
Let Jake have a fucking word.